how compound interest actually grows your money. The Securities and Exchange Commission on Investor.gov defines it in 7 words: interest paid on principal and on accumulated interest. The typical user assumption is that a savings account paying, say, 4%, simply adds 4% of your starting balance every year. That is simple interest. Compound interest does something different. The interest itself starts earning interest, and the gap between those two outcomes is not small. Over 30 years, it is the difference between a line and a curve. We'll build the curve from the formula up. Remember, before the mechanism, the building blocks. There are 5. Principal, your starting amount, labeled P in the formula. Rate, the annual interest rate, labeled R, expressed as a decimal. 7% becomes 0.07. Compounding period, labeled N, the number of times per year interest is added back to the principal. Daily is 365. Monthly is 12. Semi-annual is 2. Annual is 1. Time, labeled T in years. And the resulting future value, labeled A. Per the Federal Reserve's H15 release, current benchmark rates ground these inputs in real numbers. The federal funds target range sits at 3.5% to 3.75% as of April 29, 2026. 2 more references you'll see throughout. The S&P 500's long-run annualized return is 10.33% since 1957, when the modern 500 stock index launched. Per the Motley Fool's compilation of historical data, and the IRS in Notice 2025-67 issued November 13, 2025, set the 2026 contribution limits at $24,500 for a 401(k) and $7,500 for an IRA. With those in place, here's how the mechanism actually unfolds. Step 1. First, the institution applies the rate to your principal for one period. Take Investor.gov's worked example. Principal $100. Annual rate 5%, compounded once per year. After year 1, the balance is principal times 1 plus rate. $100 times 1.05 equals $105. The $5 is interest on the original 100. If we stopped here every year and only ever paid interest on the original $100, that would be simple interest. Under simple interest, 3 years at 5% on $100 gives $115 flat. Simple interest stops there. Compounding doesn't. What the institution does with that $5 next is what matters. Scene 5, Step 2. Second, the new interest is added to the principal. Not paid out, not withdrawn. So the next period's calculation runs on the larger amount. Continuing the Investor.gov example, at the start of year 2, the balance is no longer $100. It is $105. The bank applies the same 5% rate, but now to $105. So $105 times 1.05 equals $110.25. That extra 25 cents, the difference between $110 under simple interest and $110.25 under compound, is interest earned on interest. After 10 years, that same $100 grows to more than $162. After 25 years, almost $340, with no further deposits. The gap between the two methods grows nonlinearly. At year 3, it's 76 cents. At year 25, it's roughly $240 on a $100 starting amount. Scene 6, Step 3. Third, this loop repeats every period, daily, monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually, for the entire holding window. The formula is A equals P times 1 plus R over N, all raised to the N times T power. The Wall Street prep example, $100,000 at 5% for 10 years, compounded monthly. Plug it in. R over N is 0.05 divided by 12. Times T is 120 months. The result is $164,701. That's $64,701 in interest on a $100,000 starting balance in 10 years. More frequent compounding produces more growth. Daily beats monthly beats annual, but the marginal gain shrinks. The difference between daily and continuous compounding is negligible in practical terms. A shortcut that lives alongside the formula, the rule of 72. Divide 72 by the annual rate to estimate the number of years it takes for money to double. The St. Louis Fed's worked example, at 8% annual return, 72 divided by 8 is 9. Money doubles every 9 years. Over 36 years, that's 4 doublings. $5,000 becomes 10, then 20, then 40, then 80,000. The rule of 72 is most accurate for rates between 5 and 12%. Outside that band, use the formula directly. Series I savings bonds purchased between May 1st and October 31st, 2026, carry a composite rate of 4.26%, a 0.90% fixed rate, plus a 3.34% inflation-adjusted variable rate per Treasury Direct. The Treasury describes the mechanism in its own words. Quote, "Twice a year, we add all the interest the bond earned in the previous 6 months to the main principal value of the bond." End quote. That is semi-annual compounding, N equals 2, applied at the federal level. On a bond you can buy for as little as $25, up to $10,000 per calendar year electronically. Per the Federal Reserve's G.19 release, the average credit card interest rate in February 2026 is 21.59%. LendingTree's Q1 2026 tracking puts the APR for accounts accruing interest at 21.52%. Plug that into the same formula. A $5,000 balance at 21.59%, compounded monthly with no payments, becomes roughly $6,189 after 1 year, $7,659 after 2, and over $9,400 after 3, nearly doubling in 3.5 years. Total U.S. credit card debt hit $1.277 trillion in the fourth quarter of 2025, per the New York Fed, the highest since tracking began in 1999. The compounding curve is the same shape on debt as on savings. Only the sign changes. Where the rate sits matters. The Federal Open Market Committee on April 29, 2026, held the federal funds target range at 3.50 to 3.75%, an 8-4 vote, the most dissents at a single meeting since October 1992. Chair Jerome Powell, in his December 2025 press conference, described the rate as, quote, "within a broad range of estimates of its neutral value," end quote. That number anchors short-term savings yields downstream. It is also the rate the IRS expects you to compound against when you contribute to tax-advantaged accounts. For 2026, per Notice 2025-67, that means up to $24,500 in a 401k and $7,500 in an IRA, with an additional $8,000 catch-up for age 50 and over, bringing the 401k total to $32,500. Scene 11. One more variable that compounds against you: fees. A fund's expense ratio is deducted annually from the assets, which means it doesn't just reduce this year's return. It reduces every future period's compounding base. Vanguard's S&P 500 ETF, ticker VOO, has an expense ratio of 0.03%, $3 per 10,000 invested per year. The Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund Admiral Shares, VTSAX, runs 0.04%. Compare that to a hypothetical, actively managed fund at 1%. Over 30 years on a $10,000 starting balance, growing at 7%. The difference between a 0.04% fee and a 1.00% fee is roughly $14,000 in foregone final value. Same market return, different drag. Scene 12. The single end-to-end calculation that proves the mechanism. Starting balance, $10,000. Annual rate, 7%, within the band of the S&P 500's long-run return of 10.33% since 1957, derated for inflation and fees. Compounded annually. Holding period 30 years. After year 1, $10,700. After year 5, $14,026. After year 10, $19,672. After year 20, $38,697. After year 30, $76,723. That final number, $76,723, is the future value produced by the formula $10,000 times 1.07 raised to the 30th power. The total interest earned is $66,123, more than 6 times the original principal, and almost none of it came from the first decade. The St. Louis Fed's age comparison sharpens this. 2 investors. Investor A starts at age 25, contributes $5,000 per year for 10 years, $50,000 total, then stops and lets the balance compound at 8% until age 65. Final balance, approximately $787,180. Investor B waits until age 35, then contributes $5,000 every year for 30 straight years. $150,000 total in 3 times as much money. Final balance, approximately $611,730. Investor A contributed 1/3 the dollars and ended with $175,000 more. The difference is not effort. It is the 10 extra years of compounding working in the final decades when the curve is steepest. Scene 14, misconception. 1. APR equals APY. That's not accurate. APR is the annual percentage rate without compounding. APY is the annual percentage yield with compounding included. A 7% APR compounded daily produces an APY of approximately 7.25%. On a savings account, banks usually advertise APY. On a loan or credit card, they usually advertise APR, same nominal rate, different effective number, depending on which side of the ledger you're on. Scene 15. Misconception 2. Doubling my deposit doubles my final balance. Doubling the principal does double the final balance. That part is linear. But doubling the rate or the time changes things exponentially. At 7% for 30 years, $10,000 becomes $76,123. At 14% for 30 years, it becomes roughly $5,9,500. Not double, but more than 6 times as much. The exponent is where the real leverage lives. Misconception 3. Quote, compounding is something only rich people benefit from. End quote. The growth multiplier is the same regardless of starting amount. $10,000 at 7% for 30 years multiplies by 7.61. $100 at 7% for 30 years multiplies by 7.61. The absolute dollars differ. The mechanism does not. The St. Louis Fed, in the closing line of its open vault explainer, calls compound interest, quote, perhaps even the 8th wonder of the world, end quote. The math is unambiguous. With that, the formula stands on its own.